Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, if you're not aware of it, May 15th is Election Day, primary election day. That is Tuesday. We have a pre-election wrap-up. It's something you don't want to miss. We'll be back in a moment.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, I'm sure you are well aware from the television, radio, and the mails and the robocalls and everything else that you've gotten at primary election day is on May 15th. That would be this Tuesday. Joining me is a trio of the state's leading reporters. We're going to chat about a number of aspects about this election. Sitting across from me, as often is the case, is Angela Couloumbis. She writes for the Philadelphia Inquirer. And next to her is John Micek. He's the editorial page editor of the Harrisburg Patriot News, PennLive. And I like to say, maybe an editor, but he's a reporter at heart. And sitting next to me would be my right, but your left, is Marc Levy with the Associated Press. Before we get to the questioning, here's the story. When you go to vote, you do not need a photo ID. That whole identification thing is off the question. That was ruled, am I right, unconstitutional. It's gone. But if you're a first-time voter, as Mark reminded me, you do need some kind of ID. It could be a utility bill, right, Mark? It could be
a gun permit. Yeah, it can be some sort of official piece of mail you receive at your residence.
Right. But that's first-time voters. Otherwise, now I always take my driver's license. I'm going to be on the safe side regardless of what happens. All right, Angela, I'm going to start with you. The three of you must have written hundreds of stories. What was the most fascinating thing you've done?
Well, I think the most interesting thing to watch for this year is going to be obviously in the results. And are we going to get this surge of Democratic voters coming out, as some people are predicting, because of dissatisfaction with what's happening in Washington and President Trump? So that'll be interesting to watch, but we have congressional races, we have a governor's race, and we have legislative races, and we have a
lieutenant governor,
and
right?
A lieutenant governor, and a U.S. Senate race, although there is not much in the primary in the U.S. Senate race. It has not been quite that crazy.
I'll tell you what, John, we have followed this, and I know you've written a million stories. I don't remember a time when it was more confusing. You can take with the original question or talk about, and you and I chatted about this last week at some length. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the confusing things to keep straight is that we have primaries going on with the new congressional maps that that the state Supreme Court imposed a little bit earlier this year, with completely new district numbers. At the same time, we're going to have a couple of special elections for the existing congressional districts. So it's a little hinky, and trying to keep the numbers straight. And some voters may not know what district they're in. Some voters may not know what candidates they are, and they may think they're in one district when they're in fact in another. Right. So keeping some of that stuff straight has been a little bit nuts too.
Yeah, I mean, you've written a number of stories about the congressional race. I mean, I don't know how we keep straight all of the candidates, and in some of these races, you got 7, 8, 10 people running in one party's primary. Now, I guess it's a good thing that more people are running, but go ahead.
Yeah, so there's 84 people running in congressional races. That's the most since 1984, when Pennsylvania had 5 more seats. There's 3 congressional primaries that could be decided by 16% or less of the vote. You have 10 in one race, 8 in another race, 6 in another race. And in some of these races, this is the de facto general election because the district is either very Democratic or very Republican, and the primary winner will most assuredly win the general.
All right, well, let's do a little rundown. I don't think there's any doubt that the most high-profile primary contest is the Republican gubernatorial contest. I don't think that's even in question. It could reach ultimately, $10 million in commercials, perhaps $20 million spending overall. Who knows? We'll see the final report. Millions of dollars in advertising. We've got Paul Mango, a former healthcare executive, a guy everybody knows he was in the military, running as an outsider. You got Laura Ellsworth, a lawyer in a huge law firm in Pittsburgh, 2,500 people in that law firm. And she was very active in the business community. And you, of course, got Scott Wagner, 4 years in the state Senate. John Micek, I'll start with you. Do we have any sense about what's likely to happen on Election Day with that? Would anything surprise you? Maybe I'll ask you that.
I guess not. I mean, it's been Terry, you and I have talked about this before. It's been 40 years since Republican primary voters have broken with the party-endorsed candidate, who in this case is Senator Scott Wagner from York County. So past is prologued. One would presume that it's Senator Wagner's race to lose. We've not seen any public polling head-to-head in the primary amongst these candidates. We've seen them head-to-head against Democratic Governor Tom Wolf. So we don't really know what the margin is between these candidates. I mean, I think it'd be shocking if any of them broke 30% probably in this primary. The one thing I'm sort of intrigued by is who these second and third place finishers are going to be. I mean, we've seen just internals on this 17 to 30% undecided in these races. So that the question becomes: does that mean that Laura Ellsworth, who's been regarded as the third place horse in this, finds a way to sneak into second, or does she overperform? What happens with Paul Mango? You know, it's that to me is kind of the toss-up here.
All right, we're going to run to a quick break. We're going to go to the same question. We come back, and we'll start off with Angela after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, welcome back. Joining me is John Micek, Marc Levy, and Angela Couloumbis. All three are reporters who have written extensively about all kinds of elections. We're now focusing on the primary election. All right, Angela Couloumbis, I'm back to the same question. I mean, the Republican primary, a huge amount of money spent, two of them ardent Trump supporters, Paul Mango and Scott Wagner. You've got Laura Ellsworth out in Pittsburgh, who's not, I'll put it mildly, not exactly in the Trump camp, didn't vote for him 2 years ago. What's your takeaway on this wild election?
Well, a couple things. I've been struck by the negative tone that has dominated this primary election on the Republican side, primarily between Paul Mango and Scott Wagner. I think there's been an effort between those two in particular to out-conservative each other. Who is the more conservative candidate to appeal to those voters? While Laura Ellsworth has kind of positioned herself as the candidate who's going to stay above the fray and stick to the issues. But if you listen to Scott Wagner, he has been out there trumpeting that his polling shows that he is far, far ahead of his competitors, and that is the reason why the campaign has been so negative. And it will set the stage for a very interesting matchup in the fall if Senator Wagner wins with Governor Wolf, because the two could not be any more polar opposite in personality.
That's right. Not just in substance, right, but in personality.
Right. I mean, you have Scott Wagner, who's a very emotional guy. You have Tom Wolf, who's very soft-spoken. Tom Wolf is a PhD. Scott Wagner, in his own words, barely graduated high school and didn't graduate college. They're two very different personalities, and they live 10 miles away from each other. It's a wonderful contrast.
Well, I don't think we've ever had that, particularly from York. Maybe in the old days, you could have a couple people from Allegheny County or Philadelphia County, but not. But what's fascinating, Mark, is that when it comes to the issues, Mango and Wagner, my sense is that 95% of what they would pursue would be remarkably similar, or am I wrong about that?
Look, they've worked to make the case that they're the most conservative candidate in the race, but there are areas where Scott Wagner breaks with GOP orthodoxy, which is interesting. He supports a minimum wage increase. He supports a bill that would protect discrimination against gender identity and expression in the workplace. So, but you're right. I think on 95% of what you would see come up.
Budgets and taxes, and would you all agree that we're going to be pretty similar there?
All three of them, really. I mean, the differences are in the margins rather than sort of bright line distinctions.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on. But the bottom line is, Governor Wolf has no opponent, so the winner will face Governor Wolf, and it's likely that on May 16th, the general election campaign, I mean, it's already begun, but am I right? The campaign will begin in earnest on May 16th.
Believe it or not, there is a fairly crowded primary for the position of lieutenant governor.
We're getting there. Go ahead.
There are 5 Democrats who are running for that position. And Lieutenant Governor Stack has tried to weather this controversy that has surrounded him and dogged him for the last year, which is whether he mistreated his employees.
Right.
And there are a lot of people who jokingly say, why would anybody ever want to run for that position? Well, that position pays very well.
Yeah.
And it is
good for the pension.
Good for the pension. It is not a high-stress position unless you have a good relationship with the existing governor.
And he actually gives you something to do.
And he actually gives you something to do. And these two, Lieutenant Governor Stack and Governor Wolf, have had a notoriously chilly relationship. So it'll be interesting to see who prevails in that
John,
race.
now, so you have 5 Democrats running. Probably the best known of Stack's opponents is John Fetterman. Go ahead, talk about him.
Yeah, that's John Fetterman, the mayor of Braddock, Pennsylvania, out there in Allegheny County, former steel town. He often talks about his efforts to revitalize that in the face of crime and addiction and economic hardship. He ran for Senate in 2016. The Democratic nomination, finished 3rd there, but in fact overperformed in that race against Katie McGinty and Joe Sestak. If there is sort of a favorite, he might be it, although you do have Nina Ahmad, who is the former deputy mayor of Philadelphia, who is in that race as well.
Another progressive.
Another progressive, also putting in quite a lot of money, as is Mr. Fetterman. We'd seen like last week that the three between Stack, Fetterman, and Ahmad, they were set to drop about $1 million in an ad buy in the final week of this race, which is just unbelievable when you consider that it's lieutenant governor, for goodness sake. I mean, the three official
you're a
duties
heartbeat away.
Yeah, I mean, it's running the Senate, it's running the pardons board, and occasionally checking the governor's pulse. I mean, that's really what this job does.
All right, on the Republican side, something unusual is you have the two of the 3 Republican candidates who've actually selected running mates. I mean, that is pretty rare.
Right, they're pretending that they selected running mates. Voters are really going to be the ones who select the running mate. You don't vote for the lieutenant governor in November. You vote in the primary, and so you could end up with a situation where the Republicans pick a gubernatorial candidate and a strange bedfellow of a lieutenant governor candidate who did not run with them in the primary, and so that will be interesting to watch.
And there are 4 Republicans running.
In the primary?
In the primary.
Is that right? 4?
Yes.
I've lost count. Thank you.
I know. We were talking about this earlier when I don't even know if we're going to venture into the congressional races. Read what these folks have written in your local papers and you'll be able to pick up but it is virtually impossible. Yeah, Scott Wagner has selected Jeff Bartos and they're running commercials. Paul Mango has selected a Washington County Commissioner, Diana Irie Vaughn. Do I have that right?
Yes.
I'm trying to keep them all straight. And then you have 2 other candidates. At least they're running as a team, and that's unusual in the first term when you get it. And we'll see what happens there. Anybody, any wisdom about what's likely to happen there? And everybody is right up in the air.
Again, if you go with the endorsement orthodoxy, Mr. Bartos has the party's endorsement, so take that for whatever it's worth.
If it's the year of the woman, as Laura Ellsworth, the Republican gubernatorial candidate, said it is, then perhaps that favors Diana Irie Vaughn in the primary this year.
That's a good point. All right, we're going to run to a break. We'll keep you in surprise about where we go next. We have a lot of choices.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions.
where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, I'm chatting with Angela Couloumbis, John Micek, and Marc Levy. They've been following this election for their respective news outlets, writing extensively about it. I'm going to turn to Marc. He's on my right, your left. Marc, I want to tell you, these 18 congressional races, 84 candidates running, some of them, the folks are running unopposed, but in most of the districts, there's competition for the Republican and the Democratic nominations. Right. Some of them have 8, 9, 10 people running in a primary. What, I mean, I've not seen this before, and I've been following this stuff for a long time. Take it away.
Yeah, it's been a long time since we've seen anything like this. It's essentially a perfect storm of a Democratic fever, an anti-Trump fever. 7 open seats, which is the most since at least the 1970s. And,
far more Democrats running than Republicans. That goes to this anti-Trump fever.
Far more Democrats, that's right. About 2 to 1. And also there's a new map. The state Supreme Court redrew the map in the gerrymandering case, said it was unfair. It was unfairly drawn to favor Republicans, and now you have a new map that, in theory, favors or will help Democrats pick up at least 2 seats. I think everyone expects them to pick up 2 seats.
Maybe 3.
There's 3 seats that are considered toss-ups. If Democrats do really well, there may be another seat there for them. So if you have 18 seats, 13 Republicans were elected in 2016. In theory, you could see 9, 10, 11 Democrats elected this year.
John, I don't think that's out of the question at all. And on the Republican side, here's what's fascinating. It's exactly the opposite. Many of them are running as Trump-like, as we just talked about. So we're going in different directions depending on the party. Take it away.
We really are. I mean, if you look out in the 17th district where Connor Lamb is running against Keith Rothfuss.
Right. Who's the incumbent?
Incumbent out there, who's a very Trumpian Republican. He embraced him early in 2016, has held to the White House's line on a number of issues. You zip down to the 14th district where Rick Saccone and the state house member who ran in that March special against Connor Lamb and lost, is running against Guy Reschenthaler, a Allegheny County state senator. They too are hewing to the Trumpian playbook and each trying to out-conservative each other in sort of a microcosm of the gubernatorial race. The one thing I did want to bring up, though, Terry, is the interesting thing about this race, and Marc talked about the year of the woman a couple of years ago, or a couple of minutes ago, rather, excuse me, is that you have any number of really well-qualified female candidates running in these races in the Southeast, although it's entirely possible that with no women in the state's congressional delegation, that those seats could still go to a male candidate. You have Richie Laser in the 5th congressional district. You have Joe Huffle, who's now widely considered a spoiler in the 4th congressional district.
But here's the point. We're running to a break. I'll pick up Angela after the break. But here's the point. At the moment, we do not have a woman in the 18-person congressional delegation. We have never elected in the history of this state a female governor or a female U.S. Senator.
Exactly right.
So that's now beginning to play out big time. When we come back, we'll continue with this discussion.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Welcome back to the program, Mom. Now I'm going to turn to Angela. You've written some stories about this. How are the voters not going to be confused about this when they go to the poll, depending on, I mean, I've never seen anything like this.
Particularly in the Southeast, I think come the fall, there will be, as John and Mark mentioned, there are going to be a duo of special elections at this, in the congressional races under the old lines at the same time, old congressional maps. At the same time, they will be voting for a new person to go to Congress under the new congressional lines. So I think there's going to have to be a very, a good public education campaign so that people understand what they're going to vote for, and so that there isn't massive confusion at the polls on election day.
I'm shaking my head, Mark. I can't even begin to understand this. How you're going to go into the voting booth and you're going to vote. I'm voting in one congressional district, and by the way, I'm voting in a second congressional.
Mm-hmm. That'll be on the general election day in November. Right. Yeah, that's right. It's and that's sort of the child of lots of people resigning from office in the middle of a crazy election year, and the redrawn map that we have of congressional districts.
7 of the 18 not seeking.
It is in a way sort of a disservice also to hold it in November. For one, because of the confusion, and two, because Representatives Meehan and Dent are leaving so early that voters in those districts are going to be effectively without representation for months until voters pick basically a short-timer replacement.
And I didn't do that. I actually sort of guesstimated we could be talking about 1 million people at least who are going to be without any representation, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's exactly right.
I mean, that is a huge number.
And you'll have appropriations bills going through the Congress this summer.
All right, before I let you go, Angela started with this. I'm going to come back to her, and then we'll move on. Any sense, my sense is that we could have a larger turnout, particularly on the Democratic side than the Republican side. But do you think all these primaries are just going to, we're going to have a higher turnout than we would in whatever a normal midterm is?
It depends who you talk to, but people say that people are energized. Voters are energized in both camps. There are people who, on the Democratic side, who have an anti-Trump fervor, who will be definitely feeling like they're going to get out and vote for the best candidate, to position the best candidate for the fall. And on the opposite side, there are very fervent Trump supporters who are trying to get out there and to show that the president does still have the support. Yeah, that's great. John, you think higher than normal?
I mean, if you figure the standard primary turnout is 20, 21%, so maybe we get to 28, 30, and that we consider that a win and move on.
Do you all make you typically, doesn't the Associated Press, you kind of venture into that area, if I remember in the past, of guesstimating the turnout, or you?
We usually call you, Terry, the guesstimate.
Thank you.
But no, I don't think there's any question it'll be higher. I mean, the candidates, people in the parties have talked about how many events there's been with candidates showing up to them. They're on the radio. They're going to fire halls, they're going to social halls, and there's people coming out, getting engaged in a primary season when they normally wouldn't, because I would say greatly because there's so many big congressional races right now.
All right, look, I want to thank you for coming in. This is going to be a wild and woolly affair, and I'm going to invite our audience to make sure they read what you write, and we'll take it from there. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition. Guess what we'll do next week? We'll have to do a post-election review, and we'll do all of that, and you stay well.